What a wonderful privilege and honor to be with you this afternoon. To the convener of the platform, Pastor Kwaju Oyemade, and his dear lovely wife, Toyin, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, or good evening, as it almost is the case. Like many of the speakers before me, I actually believe in a new Nigeria, where the protocols are a lot shorter than the presentations themselves. So without further ado, I just want to use this opportunity to say to everybody today, happy 58th Independence Anniversary, Nigeria. Before I proceed, I really would like to acknowledge Pastor Kwaju for the wonderful work that he's done. Over the years, whenever I've had the opportunity, I've actually tuned in to many of the platform broadcasts, and I've been thoroughly blessed and inspired by the many speakers that we've had over the years. To my mind, this is one of the most cutting-edge platforms in this country, dealing with critical issues in a way that nobody else has. So congratulations. And thank you for all that you do. You know, after I listened to Otto's children, I honestly felt that we should all go home. Because everything that needed to be said has been said. These children give us hope in the future of Nigeria. We can be confident that because of them and millions of others that are being raised in Nigeria today, this nation will be different. This nation will be transformed. It is not a matter of if, it is absolutely inevitable. It will come to pass. Within the context of the theme of this edition of the platform, Beyond Politics, I have titled my presentation, Shaping Perceptions, a Time to Change the Nigerian Narrative. And I feel that it is my responsibility today to kind of bookend or bring all of the different elements that we've heard today together as we get ready to close. But before I do, I just want to again compliment the wonderful speakers for your inspirational messages, thought-provoking statements, and the wonderful work that you're doing to transform this nation. "59 years ago, on October 31st, 1959, approximately 100 miles from where we are today, the very first television station in Nigeria, known as WNTV Ibadan, or Western Nigerian Television Ibadan, was launched and commissioned, the very first television station in Africa. Keep in mind that the commissioning of Africa's first television station was 1 year before Nigeria's independence. The very first words that were uttered on the station came from the mouth of a female TV host, Anike Agbaje Williams, who would go on to become one of Nigeria's most distinguished broadcasters. During the station's commissioning, the visionary behind the enterprise, the then premier of Western Nigeria, Chief Obafemi Awolowo, told the gathered audience that the station's role was to do three things: to teach, to entertain, and to inspire the people of Nigeria and turn Nigeria into a booming and a successful nation. Even though the station had a very limited radius in terms of its broadcast reach, notice that 1 year before Nigeria's independence, Chief Awolowo did not limit the scope of the station's influence to the people of Ibadan or Western Nigeria, but rather to all the people of Nigeria. The station's strategic intent was simple: teach, in other words, educate, entertain, because at the end of the day, television and many other platforms is essentially, first and foremost, an entertainment platform. If you don't get that, you will not be successful on this medium. Teach, entertain, and inspire the people of Nigeria and turn Nigeria into a booming and successful nation. The goal of creative media today is no different. Whatever we do, we must be able to fulfill these three essential criteria. So if you're in the media space today, I would like to ask you the question, how is it that you're educating? How are you adding value in terms of information and knowledge? And how are you entertaining, considering that the number one reason global audiences use any kind of platform, for that matter, is entertainment. This was true in 1959, it's still true in 2018. And number three, inspire. Life as we know it is tough enough, especially here in Nigeria. I've not met a single person in my life who does not want to be inspired. After all, hope is the oxygen of life, and without it, we can never reach our full potential as individuals and even as a nation. Over the last 3 decades, through several media platforms, I've taken these principles to heart, and in my own way, I've tried to implement them in the things that I've done. Early in my broadcast career, I had the opportunity of working in news in the United States as a producer and anchor of an international global newscast. And 3 things struck me during that career. The first was the unspoken mantra that tends to drive much of what we consider to be the global news cycle today. It is a well-understood notion that if news doesn't smell, then it doesn't sell. For the most part, news editors and producers have been conditioned to ensure that only the most sensational, only the most scandalous, and only the most salacious news make it to the top of the headlines. The more devastating and the more disastrous an event, the better it is for news ratings. Essentially, we live in a 24-hour news cycle from which, if you're not careful, there is seemingly no escape from the negative news that barrages our sensibilities each and every day. These days, and forgive me for alluding to a particular cable news network, breaking news now means every bit of trivia coming out of the White House in Washington, D.C. Which, by the way, is quite interesting. In a world of 7.6 billion people, we are now fixated with what affects the concerns in the White House in Washington, D.C., a city of 690,000 people. It has always seemed odd to me that in a world of global events, this particular network would be fixated on this one issue. I'm not saying American politics isn't important. However, I do wonder why news about other parts of the world are seemingly less important. It is time to change the narrative. The second thing that struck me was the narrative about Africa in general. Then and still today, the prism of perception about the continent, and indeed Nigeria, has for too long revolved around the 4 Ds of disintegration, disorientation, destruction, and death. You're guaranteed 100% that if a news item about Africa or Nigeria makes it onto the global headlines, more likely than not, it will be a negative report. And so daily, the drumbeat of negativity never ends. As we all know, we as Nigerians are very competitive. Competition is embedded in our very DNA. We don't like to be outdone by anybody else. So guess what? Over the years, we've taken cues from what we hear on international platforms. And we've actually upped it a little bit more. Today is Independence Day, so what I wanted to prove actually didn't hold today, but I guarantee you tomorrow you tune in or buy yourself a newspaper and tell me what's on the front page. I call it intellectual laziness because it is so easy to talk about the negativity rather than it is to talk about the good that is taking place. How many journalists and how many producers in Nigeria have taken the time to interview the people that we've heard in this room? Or have taken the opportunity to go to Makoko and see what is happening down there? As I said earlier, if it doesn't smell, It doesn't sell, but it is time to change. Let's not be too quick to assume that when we talk about media today, we're talking about some organization or some far-off entity in Lagos or in Abuja. Today, in a digital space, every single one of us is a consumer, a content creator, and a distributor of media. So guess what? We are all complicit in the negative narrative about our nation and even about our continent. Whether it's on YouTube, Vimeo, Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp, Flickr, Google+, Pinterest, we're all communicating something, and most times what we're communicating is negative. It is time to change. The third thing that struck me in my early career was how a particular group of people were taking advantage of the opportunities in Africa. Instinctively, whenever I would get onto any plane, I honed this skill about 30 years ago. Immediately, I would scan the plane and ask myself the question, who is on this plane right now? And without fail, for many years, the majority of people on the plane were either from Europe or from North America or from Asia. And I began to ask myself the question, if Africa and indeed Nigeria is so messed up, why is it that you're beating down the door to want to be in our nation and on our continent on every single plane that lands on the continent? There's obviously something that you're seeing in spite of the negative narrative that makes you interested in our continent. In particular, I've spoken to many of my African-American brothers. And I said, when I get on those planes, guess what? You're the missing face.